Good heavens, Clara muttered, her voice trembling as the flashlight flickered in her grip. The thin trail of light pierced the heavy, humid air of the cellar, eventually coming to rest on a figure chained to a decaying pipe. The man was a shell of a person. His frame sagged under the weight of his bonds, his breath coming in ragged, uneven gasps. His skin, mottled with bruises, had faded to a sickly ashen hue. Clara's pulse thundered in her chest, a rhythmic drumming that drowned out the silence of the room. Surrounded by the stench of stagnant water and rusting iron, she instinctively recoiled, her shoes grating against the rough floor. Suddenly, the captive struggled to raise his chin. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing a gaze clouded by pain. "Water," he croaked, the word barely audible. Clara stood frozen. This was meant to be a routine tidying task for a local realtor, an abandoned property in a peaceful Milwaukee neighborhood. The agent had promised an empty house, just a bit of grime and silence. Instead, she had stumbled upon a soul clinging to life in the dark. Despite the fear screaming inside her, she knelt down. Memories of her past life, skills she thought she had buried, began to surface. "Just stay still," she whispered, as much for her own courage as for his comfort. Placing the light on the ground, she shed her coat and checked his vitals. His pulse was thready and erratic. "Lord, give me strength," she breathed. She reached into her bag, pulling out some gauze and a pack of antiseptic wipes she always carried for her son, Elijah. Her fingers trembled, but her training took over. She carefully adjusted the cords biting into his skin, cleaned the wound on his forehead, and moistened his parched lips. He jolted at the touch, then softened, realizing she was there to help. "My name is Clara," she told him, her voice gaining a steady, reassuring edge. "Focus on me, okay?" He gave a slight, weak nod. She opened her water bottle and held it to his lips, letting him take small, cautious sips. As he drank, a faint hint of life began to return to his features. "Thank you," he whispered. "Save your gratitude for later," she replied softly. "You aren't out of the woods yet." I can tell," he managed, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Clara draped her jacket over him, tucking it around his frame with the same tenderness she used when Elijah was sick. The man watched her intently, his eyes sharpening. "Who are you?" she asked. After a moment of hesitation, he replied, Ellis Granger." The name resonated in her mind like a sudden thunderclap. Granger. She pictured the massive advertisements in the city, the luxury hotels, and the headlines that had dominated the news for weeks. The billionaire who had disappeared without a trace. "You're Ellis Granger?" she stammered, her heart skipping a beat. "I used to be," he answered solemnly. I was just..." Her knees buckled beneath her. Clara scrambled to her feet, retreating into the shadows as the flashlight beam wavered uncontrollably. "I'm just here for the cleaning job," she stammered, her voice thin with terror. "I don't know anything about this. I swear." "I believe you," the man replied, his voice a desperate rasp. "Please, don't leave me like this. You have to help." She hesitated, every protective instinct screaming at her to run. Then the floorboards groaned above them. Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat. Ellis's eyes widened in panic. "Go!" he hissed urgently. "Get out of here." The sound of footsteps grew heavier, more deliberate. A door creaked open upstairs, followed by the sharp, irritated mutterings of a man talking to himself. Clara's lungs felt tight as she grabbed her light and dashed toward the exit. She was halfway up the cellar stairs when the overhead light clicked on, blinding her. "Who the hell are you?" a voice boomed. Standing at the top was a tall man in an expensive tailored coat, his features twisted in a mask of fury. He looked down at her with pure disgust, as if she were a stain on his floor. His eyes flicked past her, peering into the gloom of the basement. "What did you see down there?" he demanded, stepping closer. Clara's mind whirled. "Sir, I'm the cleaner." "The agency sent me," she said, her words tumbling out. "I didn't see a thing, just dust and old pipes." The man loomed over her, his presence suffocating. "You're lying to me." "I swear on my child's life," she pleaded, her voice shaking. "I just started today." He sneered, a cold, mocking sound. You people always hide behind your children. It's pathetic. The insult cut deep, but before she could react, he lunged forward, gripping her arm with bruising force. Clara gasped in pain. You think you can just wander into places you don't belong? He hissed into her ear. Who do you think the world will believe? You or me? With a violent shove, he slammed her against the concrete wall. Stars danced in her vision as her head made impact. Please, she whimpered. I didn't do anything. Listen closely, he leaned in, his breath cold against her skin. If you ever speak of this, you're finished. No job, no reputation, maybe worse. Do you understand? Clara nodded frantically, tears stinging her eyes. I won't say a word. He released her with a final, contemptuous push. Get out, and if I catch you near this property again, you'll regret the day you were born. Clara stumbled up the remaining steps, her arm throbbing and her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't dare look back. Outside, the sharp autumn air felt like a physical blow. She reached her car with trembling hands, fumbling with the keys as her bruised cheek began to swell. It was just a job, she whispered to herself, trying to stop the shaking as she drove away. But the image of Ellis's eyes, full of terror and a flicker of hope, haunted her. That evening, her son Elijah noticed a dark mark on her arm. Mama, what happened? She forced a bright, fake smile. Just being clumsy, baby. I'm just tired. But as she lay in the dark later that night, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, his plea echoed in the silence. Asterisk, please. Don't leave me. Asterisk, a heavy weight settled in her chest. She knew she had abandoned him, but she also knew she couldn't stay away for long. Clara stood in her cramped kitchen the next morning, lost in thought as the fluorescent light flickered overhead. The kettle hissed, but she was miles away. Her arm was purple where Ellis's brother, Andrew Granger, she now realized, had grabbed her. She had hidden a bruise on her face with makeup before Elijah woke up. She watched her 10-year-old son eating his breakfast, his mind focused only on math homework and cereal. He was so innocent. A new fear took root. What if that man had followed her? What if he found them here? She turned off the stove, but the tea remained unmade. Her mind was a loop of the basement scene. Ellis Granger was real. He was alive, and he was being treated like an animal by his own blood. She had seen enough of the world to know that family ties didn't always guarantee mercy. Silence wouldn't protect her, and it certainly wouldn't save him. Once Elijah was safely asleep, Clara sat on her bed, the only sound the low hum of the refrigerator. On the news, a reporter was discussing the mystery of Ellis Granger's disappearance. No leads, no suspects. His massive estate was currently being managed by his younger brother, Andrew. That's him, Clara whispered, her stomach churning with rage. That's the man who touched me. With shaking fingers, she searched his name online. She watched a video of Ellis at a gala, vibrant, eloquent, and powerful. The same voice that had whispered, "Thank you," from the darkness. Then a photo of Andrew appeared, polished, sharp, and hiding a monster beneath the suit. Andrew was a constant shadow in his brother's public life, appearing in every photograph like a man forcing a grin for a world he didn't like. Clara stared at his image on the screen before snapping it shut, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. The police weren't an option. Neither was the realtor. In the eyes of the law, she was just an undocumented cleaner, a ghost in the system. If she spoke up, Andrew Granger's influence would crush her before she could even finish her sentence. Accusations of trespassing would be the least of her worries. Yet, the thought of staying away felt like a different kind of death sentence. The following morning, Clara moved with quiet purpose. Into her bag went a makeshift medical kit, a protein bar, and a cold bottle of water. She gave Elijah a quick kiss on the forehead, watching him head off to school with his backpack bobbing against his small frame, before she set out. She drove in erratic patterns, eyes constantly on the rearview mirror to ensure no one was trailing her. When the Granger estate finally loomed into view, it looked as desolate and imposing as ever. She left her car a few blocks away and approached on foot, slipping through a side gate she'd scouted earlier. The lack of security felt like a trap, or perhaps Andrew was simply too arrogant to believe anyone would dare return. Inside, the marble floors felt like ice beneath her sneakers. She reached the cellar door, held her breath, and began the descent, every creak of which sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. The air grew thinner and colder as she reached the bottom. "Ellis?" she whispered, the beam of her flashlight cutting through the gloom. Silence met her at first. Then she saw him. He was still there, leaning against a cold iron pipe, wrapped in the jacket she had left behind. As the light touched his features, his eyes flickered with a spark of recognition. "Clara," he rasped. She was by his side in an instant, her fingers finding his pulse. It was steadier today. She guided the water to his cracked lips and fed him small pieces of the protein bar, watching as he slowly regained a fraction of his strength. "You actually returned," he murmured, his voice gaining a bit of depth. "I'm a woman of my word," Clara replied, focusing on cleaning a jagged gash on his shoulder. "Though I'll admit, your brother almost made me rethink it." Ellis's expression darkened. "Andrew saw you?" "He did more than just see me," Clara said, her eyes burning with a mix of fear and defiance. "He laid hands on me, threatened to destroy my life if I ever breathed a word of this." Ellis's jaw tightened until his muscles corded. "He's going to pay for that. I'll make sure of it." "Let's focus on keeping you alive first," Clara countered. "Vengeance can wait." She paused, looking around the dark chamber. "Why didn't you fight harder? Scream? Bang on the pipes?" Ellis let out a dry, hollow laugh. "I spent the first 7 days doing exactly that. That's when I realized he'd spent a fortune soundproofing this tomb. I was never meant to be heard." He looked up at her, his gaze softening. "But somehow you did." Clara felt a lump form in her throat and quickly turned away. "I've always had sharp ears, I guess." They sat in a heavy silence for a moment before Ellis spoke again, his voice urgent. "He's going to move me. Soon. I wasn't supposed to survive this long, and he's getting desperate." Clara stood up, her resolve hardening. "Then we don't have a minute to lose. We're getting you out of here now." "I need evidence," Clara whispered, her voice tight. "Something protect us if everything falls apart." Ellis leaned his head back against the pipe, his breathing labored. "There's a file, a hidden folder," he panted. "The back office on the second floor. There's a locked drawer in the desk. If you can get into it, the truth is yours." Clara felt a lump in her throat. "The second floor? Fine, but don't expect a miracle." She stood up, dusting the grime from her jeans with shaking hands. "I'll get back to you as fast as I can." "Clara," Ellis called out, his voice weak but filled with genuine concern. "You're putting your life on the line for a stranger." She paused, looking back at him through the dim light. "I've been fighting for my life since the day I was born. At least this time, it feels like it's for something that matters." Without another word, she turned and ascended the stairs. Every creak of the old felt like a lightning strike in the silence. She didn't dare look back. She knew the clock was against her. Somewhere in the vast house above, the silence was beginning to feel heavy, as if the building itself was waking up. Clara made it back to her apartment just as the sun was dipping below the Milwaukee skyline, leaving the sky a bruised orange. The warm light hit her kitchen, but she felt nothing but a cold chill. She stood at the sink, letting the water flow over her numb fingers, staring at her reflection. The bruise on her jaw, which she had tried to hide with Elijah's makeup, was now a deep, pulsing purple. She kept hearing Ellis's warning on a loop. "He's preparing to move me." That evening, she went through the motions of motherhood like a ghost. She fed Elijah, helped him settle onto the sofa with his books, and read to him until his eyes fluttered shut. To him, it was a normal Tuesday. To her, it was a calm before a storm that could take everything away. Once his breathing leveled into deep sleep, she slipped out into the night. She parked several streets away from the Granger mansion. The neighborhood was eerily still, the only sound the dry rustle of autumn leaves. She moved toward the estate, mentally mapping her path. The side entrance, the west staircase, the office. The house stood before her, a dark, silent titan. Andrew Granger had looked at her as if she were invisible, a person whose voice would never be heard. Tonight, she was going to prove him wrong. She slipped through the door, her hands gloved and her heart drumming a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She navigated the hallways with the precision of a shadow, avoiding the floorboards she knew would groan. She reached the base of the west stairs and froze. Silence. No voices, no footsteps. Just the sound of her own blood rushing in her ears as she looked up into the darkness of the second floor. The second floor was a tomb of expensive wood and suffocating silence. The thick corridor carpet swallowed the sound of Clara's movement as she glided past heavy doors and tarnished chandeliers that hadn't seen light in a decade. She found the office, a pair of imposing oak doors with brass fittings. One was slightly ajar. Pushing it open, she was met with a scent of stagnant air and aging parchment. A massive cherry-wood desk dominated the room, backed by a window that looked out onto the dark, indifferent yard. The walls were lined with volumes on law, finance, and power. Clara went straight for the drawers. Top, middle, both locked. She reached into her pocket and produced a hairpin. She remembered her cousin's laughter back in Baton Rouge years ago, teaching her to pick locks just for emergencies. With a steady hand, she manipulated the pin. Click! The lock surrendered with a sharp snap. Inside lay 2 bulging manila folders and a leather-bound journal. Clara flipped open the first file, and her heart nearly stopped. It was a meticulous record of a life being stolen. Bank records, legal agreements, and printed emails. There were photos of Ellis at work, on holiday, and with a woman she didn't know. Then the tone shifted. Surveillance photos of Ellis entering this very house 3 weeks ago, followed by a shot of car at the back entrance. The plates matched the vehicle she'd seen on her first day. The second folder was even more damning. Forged signatures and power of attorney documents, all dated after the world thought Ellis Granger had vanished. It was a cold-blooded corporate coup. Moving quickly, Clara used her phone to photograph every page, the flash muffled by her thumb. She was tucking the physical folders into her tote bag when a floorboard groaned in the hallway. She froze. Flashlight off. Silence. Another creak, closer this time. Clara scrambled into the knee-hole of the massive desk, just as the door swung wide. The footsteps were slow, measured, and terrifyingly familiar. "Who's lurking in here?" a low voice called out. "Andrew." Clara pressed her back against the wood, her heart hammering so hard she feared he could hear it. The rustle of his coat was inches away as he stood by the desk. The silence stretched until it felt like it would snap. Suddenly, a phone buzzed. Andrew let out a sharp, irritated curse and turned, his footsteps retreating back toward the hall. She waited until the sound died away completely before crawling out. She didn't run. She moved like a ghost, slipping down the stairs and out into the biting night air. She didn't stop until she was blocks away, safe inside her locked car, her forehead resting against the wheel. Back at the apartment, the world was still. Elijah was a peaceful silhouette under his blankets. Clara watched him for a long moment, her hand trembling as she touched his hair. "I'll keep you safe," she vowed quietly, "even if I have to burn his world to the ground." She stashed the documents deep in the linen closet, hidden behind a stack of old towels. Finally, she sat at her small kitchen table and opened the leather notebook. Ellis had filled the margins with frantic observations and lists of names. But one page caught her eye, a single entry that changed everything. It read, "If I don't make it, let the world know the truth. And tell her thank you." Clara felt a sharp pang in her chest as she read those words. This had transcended a simple struggle for survival. It was now a crusade for justice. She drifted into a restless sleep at the kitchen table and woke before the first light of dawn, her muscles stiff and her mind racing. The folders sat on the counter, their edges worn and stained by the weight of the secrets they held. Despite only getting 2 hours of sleep, she felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of terror, fury, and a long-lost sense of conviction. She knew the evidence was damning, but Andrew was powerful. A woman in her position, with no legal ties to the estate and no one to back her up, would be an easy target for his lawyers. If she went to the authorities too soon, they might just sweep it under the rug. She needed to move before Ellis was relocated, or, worse, silenced forever. At 7:15 a.m., she sent Elijah off to school, wiping a smudge of peanut butter from his cheek with a tender hand. "Be safe, baby. I'll see you later," she promised. "Working again, Mama?" he asked, looking at her with curious eyes. She forced a nod. Just some extra cleaning. It might be a long one today. Okay. Love you, Mama, he called out as he ran toward the bus stop. Clara watched him go, whispering a silent vow to protect him at any cost. To avoid being tracked, she left her car behind and took the bus, walking the final mile through a labyrinth of alleys and backyards. Every bone in her body ached, and the bruise on her arm had turned a deep, angry violet. But she pushed forward. The Granger mansion loomed like a grim fortress. Finding the side door still unlocked, she realized Andrew's arrogance was his greatest flaw. He truly believed he was untouchable. She navigated the silent rooms with ghostly precision, her heart stopping at every minor creak. She reached the cellar stairs and descended into the damp darkness, clutching her flashlight like a shield. "Ellis," she hissed as she hit the bottom. There was no reply. "Ellis, it's Clara. I'm back." Silence. The beam of her light wavered as she approached the pipe. He was slumped over, his head turned toward the cold stone wall, motionless. A wave of pure panic washed over her. She scrambled to his side, her knees hitting the hard floor as she grabbed his wrist. His skin was deathly cold, but beneath her fingers she felt a heartbeat, irregular and dangerously faint. "No, no, no," she whimpered, her voice cracking the dark. "Stay with me, Ellis. Don't you dare leave now." "Don't you dare give up on me," Clara hissed, her voice a mix of command and prayer. She fumbled with her kit, tearing open a packet of glucose gel and carefully pressing a drop against his parched lips. "Come on, Mr. Billionaire. You aren't dying in a hole like this. Not after everything we've been through." His head lolled to the side, and a jagged groan finally broke the silence in the cellar. "That's it. Stay in the light. Keep fighting." She watched him intently as he managed to swallow. "I've got you," she whispered, gently dabbing the cold sweat from his forehead. "You aren't in this alone anymore." Ellis stirred, his eyelids flickering as he struggled to focus. "Clara? I'm right here." I thought I was dreaming," he wheezed. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You dream about women breaking into basements with protein gel? You've got quite the imagination." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "It's better than the nightmares." She continued to feed him in slow, deliberate motions, allowing him to sip water drop by drop until he found the strength to sit upright against the pipe. Once he seemed stable, she leaned in close. "I found the files. All of them. The forged signatures, the corporate lies, the whole paper trail. You were right about Andrew. He's been systematic." Ellis nodded, though the movement clearly cost him. "He'll stop at nothing to protect that secret." "He nearly caught me in the office last night," Clara admitted. Ellis's expression darkened instantly. "He could have killed you. You shouldn't have gone back." "But I did," she said firmly, pulling back her sleeve to reveal the dark, ugly bruise. "I'm still standing." He looked away, his face etched with guilt. "I never wanted you to be a part of this." "I chose this path," she countered. "You didn't ask me for a thing. But when I heard your voice that first night, walking away wasn't an option. I knew I couldn't live with myself if I did." A heavy silence settled between them, broken only by the sound of their breathing. Finally, Ellis looked her in the eye. "I have to leave. Not tomorrow. Now." Clara looked around the dark room, panic rising. "If he finds you gone, he'll hunt us both down. It might make things 100 times worse." "If he moves me again, I'm a dead man," Ellis insisted. "He knows someone is helping me. He won't stop until he finds out who you are." Clara hesitated, knowing they were standing on the edge of a precipice. "There's an old laundry chute upstairs," she said finally, her mind racing. "It leads directly down here. If I can rig it and prop it open, I might be able to pull you up. You've lost enough weight that it might actually work." He managed a weak, dry chuckle. "Thanks for the compliment, I think. I'll need some sturdy rope," she muttered, looking at the ceiling. "And probably a miracle." Ellis coughed, a faint light returning to his eyes. "Miracles happen, Clara. You're the living proof of that." Clara stood up, brushing the dust from her knees. "I'll be back tonight," she whispered, "after the sun goes down." Before she could turn away, Ellis reached out and caught her hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes were filled with an intense, silent plea. "Be careful, Clara." "You too," she replied softly, before slipping out of the cellar. Every step of her exit was a practiced shadow of her entrance. Later that day, Clara moved through the city with a new sense of purpose. She visited a local hardware store, paying cash for 50 feet of heavy-duty nylon rope, a set of work gloves, and a small pulley system. When the clerk asked, she offered a polite lie about a project for her church. Her next stop was a public library, where she made several copies of the most incriminating documents from Ellis's files. She labeled the envelopes in bold, stark letters, "The Truth About Granger." One copy was sent to a secure P.O. box she had opened under an alias. It was her insurance policy. That night, as Elijah slept peacefully, Clara sat at her kitchen table staring at the coiled rope. Tomorrow would be the day they attempted the impossible. She closed her eyes for a moment of silence. "I don't ask for much," she breathed. "Just don't let me lose him now." The following morning was grim, the sky heavy with leaden clouds. It felt as though the entire world was waiting for something to break. Clara packed Elijah's lunch with trembling hands, adding an extra treat and kissing him twice before he boarded the school bus. Once the morning rush subsided, she borrowed a rusted bicycle from a neighbor, hiding the rope and gear in a duffel bag. She pedaled toward the estate, looking like just another resident out for a morning ride. By 10 a.m., she was at the rear of the mansion. The silence was absolute. She hid the bike behind an old shed and slipped through the side door. Andrew's arrogance remained her greatest ally. There were still no new locks and no visible security. She moved like a ghost up the back stairs to the second floor, bypassing the grand portraits of the Granger ancestors. In a narrow service hallway, she found the old metal laundry chute. She tested it with a rubber ball. It dropped straight down, hitting the basement floor with a dull thud near the pipes where Ellis was held. Clara acted quickly. She anchored the rope to a massive cast-iron radiator and began feeding it down the dark shaft, knotting it every few feet to provide a better grip. Once the line hit the bottom, she gave 3 sharp tugs, their prearranged signal. The rope remained still for an agonizing minute. Then it jerked once, twice. Suddenly, it went taut with dead weight. Clara dropped to the floor, bracing her feet against the baseboard. She began to pull. Her muscles screamed and sweat stung her eyes, but inch by inch, she hauled him up. When Ellis's had finally appeared at the mouth of the chute, covered in dust and sweat, Clara let out a ragged gasp. "Are you all right?" He was trembling and deathly pale, but a weak smile broke through. "It feels like being born again," he rasped. "Let's try not to repeat the experience," she muttered, helping him crawl out onto the hallway floor. Ellis took a deep breath of the filtered upstairs air. "You smell like cinnamon," he whispered, his voice shaking. Clara gave a small, nervous laugh. "That's just my lotion. Don't get sentimental on me yet." She handed him a bottle of water and a set of clean, oversized clothes. He changed with agonizing slowness, his body struggling to remember how to move freely. Finally, he stood up, leaning heavily against the wall for support. "I can walk," he insisted. "Barely," Clara countered, looping his arm over her shoulder. "But we're out of time. We have to move." Together, they began their slow, silent escape through the belly of the mansion. The mansion felt like it was watching them, every shadow stretching out to trip their faltering steps. Clara could feel the heat radiating from Ellis's body, his effort to remain upright a testament to his sheer willpower. They were only a few yards from the side exit when the heavy front doors groaned open. The sound of polished leather shoes echoed through the marble foyer. Andrew's voice, sharp and cold as a winter wind, sliced through the silence. "I know you're in here, Clara. Did you really think I wouldn't notice a missing bike or the smell of cheap perfume in my hallways?" Clara's heart nearly stopped. She ducked with Ellis into the shadows of the library, pressing him against a bookshelf. "Don't move," she breathed, her lips inches from his ear. "She's not alone, Andrew," a second voice boomed. Clara's blood ran cold. It was the realtor, the same man who had sent her here. He wasn't just a bystander, He was an accomplice. Find them, Andrew hissed. And this time, make sure they don't have enough breath left to tell stories. Clara looked at Ellis. His eyes were wide, but the panic had been replaced by a cold, hard clarity. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object, a brass paperweight he'd snatched from the office desk earlier. "The side door is blocked," Clara whispered, peering through the crack of the library door. "We have to go through the kitchen to the servants' entrance." They moved like ghosts, darting between the shadows of the grand dining room. Behind them, they could hear the heavy footsteps of the realtor and the rhythmic tap of Andrew's cane. Just as they reached the kitchen, a floorboard shrieked under Clara's weight. "There!" The realtor lunged into the kitchen, his face contorted with rage. But Clara didn't scream. She didn't run. As the man swung a heavy flashlight toward her head, she ducked, and Ellis, using the last of his strength, swung the brass paperweight with a desperate roar. It connected with a sickening thud. The realtor crumpled to the floor. "Go!" Ellis wheezed, his face ashen. Clara grabbed his hand, and they burst through the servants' door into gray morning air. They didn't head for the bike. They headed for the woods behind the estate. Behind them, Andrew's voice echoed, frantic and losing its composure. "You have nowhere to go. The world belongs to me." "Not today," Clara whispered to the wind as they disappeared into the thicket. She led him to an old garden shed she'd spotted days ago. Inside, hidden under a tarp, she pulled out her phone. She didn't call the police, not yet. She opened her email and hit send on a pre-drafted message containing every photo she had taken. The recipients, the 3 largest news outlets in the country. "It's done," she said, looking at Ellis. The sun finally broke through the gray clouds, casting a sliver of light onto his face. For the first time, he looked like a man who wasn't afraid of the dark. "You saved me, Clara," he whispered, his voice finally steady. "No," she said, checking her watch. "We saved each other. Now let's go get my son."